Hello and welcome to PR on the Record. My name is Ariel Shapiro.
And I'm Shahni, Ben-Haim, and we'll be exploring the role of public relations in shaping success within the tech ecosystem, giving you an inside look into our industry, discussing the stories, strategies, and insights behind successful tech PR.
Today, we're talking about what we use in our toolbox as PR professionals, giving full transparency to the process and the outcomes of best practices. So, whether you're a startup founder, a tech marketer, or just someone curious about the behind the scenes of how tech stories get told, you're in the right place.
Let's dive in. Ariel, excited to record this episode and give people kind of an inside look into how we do the work that we do. I know we've already discussed misconceptions that people already have out there, so now we're just peeling back another layer. Maybe aspiring PR practitioners will also be interested in this podcast, but I think that this is really to share and be transparent to the people that we work with, the people that we are discussing PR efforts for clients with, or people who are looking into pursuing PR efforts. We're giving them the whole toolbox, the whole toolkit, really, like I said, peeling back the layers of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, to discuss the process, because I think PR generally is a bit of a dark art, if you want to call it that, in terms of people don't generally know what we do. And at that kind of point, I think with this, as we discussed last time, there are some myths around it. But I think if we kind of go step by step, explain the process as well as the tools in the toolkit, I think it'll be really helpful for people listening.
Definitely. So maybe we could start with when we work with specific clients. So there's always an onboarding process, and we need to put together some information to be able to build this toolkit that we use. We need to individualize it. Today, I think the running trend is personalization and being highly personalized in specific outreach with marketing as well, speaking to target audiences, really defining the target personas that we're trying to reach. And in PR, we've discussed that includes the journalists, but not only the journalists, the audience of the journalist. So understanding more about the technologies that we're trying to get out there to be written about in the news, we need to dive in and create a foundation for that outreach. And I think that comes in the onboarding process. So going back to my question, Ariel, how do you go about creating the materials that you use in your PR toolkit to create an impactful strategy?
Yes, for me anyway, the most important thing when you're starting is having an open and honest conversation with your client. Because as much as we can research, we can look into the industry, we can look and see what's online about different companies, the competitors, and also about the technology that we're going to be, focusing on with our client. We really need to understand from them what they're looking to achieve and also how everything works. So that, for me, is the absolute crucial starting point of understanding from them what their technology does, why they started it as well, because there's usually some amazing story there about why they started their company and what unmet need they're looking to resolve. And then once we have that story, it's a case of crafting the key messages. That's my first building block. When I start working with a company, I've got like three kind of stages. The first one is the key messages. So what are the three core messages that we want to talk about to the press and talk about with the company? So that's kind of where I start from.
Do you use the pain points of the users of the technology of the company that you're working with to craft those key messages? Like, how are you identifying what the key messages are and aligning that to the goals of the company that you're working with?
That's a great question. And the truth is that I think that any good PR strategy has to really be in line with the business goals and the sales goals of a company. So it really comes down to that at the end of the day. Are they looking to target investors? Are they looking to get more customers? So it's going to come down to that. But ultimately, yes, you want to use the pain points to craft those messages, but obviously in a positive way. You want to tap into why people want to use the technology and what unmet need the technology or the solution is solving. And once you have those in the palm of your hand, if you want to talk about that in those kind of terms, then it just makes it easier. And usually when you're talking to the CEO or one of the C-suite at a company, it becomes quite clear relatively quickly what those pain points are, because they are experts in the industry and they know it inside and out. So it doesn't usually take long to really understand that. But the hard part, and where the expertise and the craft of PR comes in, is how to communicate those messages successfully.
It's all in the storytelling. I think that, like you said, the C-suite executives already know how to portray that, because from what I know, from what I've heard from investors in investor meetings, is they're looking for that personal story to understand the unmet need that this technology is fulfilling. So, same goes for PR. Journalists want to understand the story of why this is so different and why it's something that we've never had before. Also tying it to other assets that are out there, whether it be research, use cases. We can get into that down the line. But those key messages, just reinforcing that those are so important to establish the foundation of a PR strategy as a whole. It's very, very, very important. So we talked about the core messaging. Do you want to give us a little bit of information on the other 2 steps in that 3 steps that you were speaking about?
Yeah, sure. So once we have the core messaging down and agreed and finalized, then I go ahead and I plan a strategy. So that usually takes about the next 3 months. What topics are we going to talk about? Which publications are we going to reach out to? And so it just builds out the next few months and gives a roadmap essentially of what we're going to be doing. And then once that's in place, then the 3rd step is the actual media engagement. And that's how I like to start with clients. I think it gives us a clear plan and a direction of which to follow. And then after that initial 3 months, again, we strategize again for the next 3 months, because especially now, everything moves so quickly and things change, sometimes on a daily basis. So to have a plan for the next 6 months sometimes doesn't quite work, because what's relevant in 6 months now won't be relevant when that time actually comes. So I like to look at it on a 3-month basis and keep planning, keep reassessing. And it also means that if we get feedback from a reporter at any point, we can put that into the strategy, as opposed to having to wait a few months to kind of get that feedback into what we're doing. So that's kind of how I do it. But we're here to discuss the toolkit, and that's part of it, I suppose. But I think more specifically, press releases are something that people will have heard of, maybe be a little bit familiar with, but not really know exactly what they are. So do you want to just take us through that?
Yeah, just to go back, just to clarify, you're not building the strategy over 3 months. You're building a strategy for 3 months at a time. And that strategy is flexible, like you said. When you're implementing that strategy, you're going back in, understanding what feedback is. You're also monitoring the news to understand, should we pitch a story that's, we've had logged into this strategy calendar, or are we rolling with the news? Because like you said, news cycles work fast, and they are working faster than ever now. So we really need to implement media monitoring within that strategy and see how tech companies can insert their news into the news. But going into press releases are also another asset to strategically include into the entire PR strategy, because they have a different function than just pitching media on a regular basis. Press releases are for significant news, whether that's funding, product launch, even new C-suite announcements. And then beyond that, there are, depending on the types of news as well, strategies for how to do the outreach around press releases. But press releases are really mainly used for specific cases within the strategy to create media buzz around one specific news case.
And what I will add to that is that news releases generally are pretty dull and boring. They're factual, essentially. Any context or how it fits into the larger picture, there might be a line about that in the press release, but ultimately that's going to be in the pitch to the reporter.
Like Ariel said, it might not be the flashiest type of news, and that it's really comes down to the facts of what's there. but also it's important to think about what's within the press release. Press releases don't have to lack a newsworthy angle. For instance, if a tech company is getting $20 million in round A and wants to create a press release around that, why are they getting $20 million in round A? Because they want to develop their product to reach these specific people, or they're entering a new target market and they want to market themselves or something like that because it's fulfilling an unmet need. So it could be that more recently in the news, we're seeing stories about how a specific demographic or other businesses are struggling with a specific pain point, and this investment into this tech company is going to fulfilling the need to further develop their tech or for any other reason so that it could help fix this other pain point or this other need. There's always a way to tie in these press releases to a newsworthy event, I would say, except for the case of C-suite announcements, which are also a bit dull. And what I advise is that for C-suite announcements, it's mainly to put on a newswire to create a paper trail. And we've discussed newswires in the past and what their function is. And I think that in that specific case, that's, like I said, for a paper trail for potential investors to look at and say, okay, there's ongoing company activity. They're bringing in this big player to be a C-suite executive, and they're also kind of reinforcing the C-suite executive that they selected this person for this position specifically because they have all of these experiences and accolades and, et cetera, et cetera. There might be others, we've spoken about in the past how public companies need to release press releases for, quarterly reports and stuff like that. But like we said, there's a very specific use for press releases. So it's not that every single pitch requires a press release and a whole campaign around it and a whole outreach strategy. Those are inserted into the overall PR strategy. So, Ariel, you talked about your 3-step kind of process, and I have a very similar process when I'm onboarding with my clients. Another thing that I ask from my clients, besides, putting together those key messages and press releases, is also asking them what kind of events that they're going to throughout the next quarter. We use this information to leverage and create media opportunities for our clients. If those events have media, personnel, press, anything there that are covering the event, why not leverage that to create a media interview opportunity? There's also the media monitoring aspect of it all in that strategy where we're taking relevant news stories, research that's just been published, something's going on in the news that's relevant to one of our clients, and really going with that, like moving with the news cycles or predicting even something that's going to happen in the news and placing our clients there, placing tech companies there to give quotes. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you do your media monitoring?
Yeah, so in terms of media monitoring, it's something that I do every morning. The first thing I do is run searches on topics that are relevant to my clients to see if any reporters are talking about that. So whilst it's in the strategy, it's also just something that I do every day. So it doesn't take up such a prominent part of the strategy because I know that it's just going to be a daily ongoing process. But with that said, the planning stage is crucial for that because you need to know what topics your clients can talk about, right? So when you're in that kickoff meeting, discussing the technology and all of that kind of thing, you need to also ask them, what topics can you talk about? What topics do you like to talk about? And also, what topics do you not like to talk about? Because I found that even though some executives have expertise in an area, they just aren't comfortable talking about it or they don't want to talk about it for whatever reason. So that's kind of the overview of media monitoring. And then it's a case of just finding out each day what's going on in the news, what are people talking about, where can I insert my client into the conversation, and where can they add value, and then rolling with it and trying to get the conversation with the reporter going, essentially. And that for me is a really important part of what we do, because it presents lots of different opportunities that you just wouldn't have necessarily thought about when you're planning, which I guess is part of the fun and the dynamicism of PR.
100%. Like, I think you mentioned something very interesting about understanding what your C-suite executives or spokesperson for the company can talk about, because that is something that we need to take into consideration before we're doing the outreach, so that we don't reach out to a journalist and then they come back interested and then all of a sudden they can't speak about that topic, which leads me to another tool that we use is media training. It's so important to make sure that spokespeople have the media training to conduct a proper interview with this journalist, especially making sure the whole point, going back to the foundation of the key messages. How are they getting their key messages across in the conversation? So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, what I would say is that is an excellent way to break trust with a reporter, by the way, to offer them something that you can't fulfill. So that's so important to know what topics everyone can talk about. But again, coming back to what you were saying about your preparation and media training, that's crucial as well, because if they're not talking about the key messages, if they're just going to talk in general terms or not stick to what the strategy is, then essentially there's no point to that interview, because you're not going to come out with what's necessary or what's valuable for the company, or sometimes for the reporter either. So it's really important to prepare clients and spokespeople in the right way. I like to do it with a briefing document, which will list out topics for them that they want to talk about and how it relates to the key messages. And also sometimes I'll prepare them in terms of how to bring them back to the key messages from certain situations. It's also important to let them know, because I think when you're in an interview, it's a bit of a pressurized situation and you're there with a reporter, that firstly, if there's something that you don't want to see in print, don't say it. Don't assume there's an on the record and off the record situation. For me, I always say, if you don't want it in the news, just don't say it. And then you just you make sure it's not going to happen. So that's the first thing. The other thing is to, be able to disagree, because at the end of the day, they're an expert. So if the reporter says something that they don't think is true, then they should feel free to say that in a respectful way. And also, if there's a topic that they don't want to talk about that they're asked about, for example, maybe quarterly earnings or something within the company, then they can, decline to answer, and then we can give them different ways to do that as well.
I think that you mentioned something that's so important in the aspect of preparing the spokespeople for interviews, which is a briefing document. And that briefing document is really a snapshot of what the spokesperson wants to talk about with the journalist. I also include some journalist background, giving them some understanding of who the journalist that they're speaking to is, and reading a few articles that they've written in the past. And that way you really get to know the journalist, thinking of also potential questions that journalists may ask based off of the topic that we pitch them, that our spokesperson wants to talk about, that inserts the key message, and having a training session before that instills confidence. Like you said, the C-suite executive or the spokesperson for the company is usually an expert in their field. They know what they're talking about. They speak about it every single day. So being in front of a journalist is no different than, despite the fact that it's on the record, but it's no different. It shouldn't change the way that you speak about something to a colleague pertaining to the technology or the research or whatever topic that they are speaking about. So in media training with C-suite executives or spokespeople, what I like to do is kind of simulate an interview. You could say practice makes perfect if perfect exists. And oftentimes I hear from the executives that I work with that the media training that I put them through is a bit tougher than what it is when they're sitting in the actual conversations with the journalists. which is great. It's a good feeling. I don't want people to be scared to work with me as a media trainer, but it's relieving kind of, because it gives them the confidence and instills in them, like, you know your topic, you know, you eat, sleep, and breathe the tech that you're working on. So the conversation with the journalist shouldn't be bad. It's good. It's, in the end, it's for a good cause, which will end up being a media mentioned article out there with their name on it, with their expertise, explaining their brand story potentially, or their why and how they are able to do certain things, which is the whole point of PR. But that media training is so important. Having all the information to prepare the spokespeople and the C-suite executives that are speaking to the journalists is a part of our whole PR toolkit, right? Our toolbox, or whatever you want to call it. It's very important. It's the second layer. You've already built the foundation. Now you're implementing the strategy you've built. You need to create assets around that as well. And part of that is the briefing documents and the media training that we bring to the executives. Is there anything different that you do in your media training?
No, but I think coming back to what you were saying about being tough in the preparation, I think that's really important, because the actual interview, I think, should be a positive experience and a fun experience, because you want your spokespeople to do more and more interviews, so they should enjoy it. And if we're tougher with them, in the practice, then A, it teaches them how to deal with those situations, which they need to know. And B, it keeps them on their toes, but also it just means that when the reporters come and it's far less, I can't think of the right word, not controversial.
Intense.
Yeah, when it's less intense, I guess, then they just kind of relax into it a bit more and enjoy the experience. I think probably because of TV and movies and stuff, I think people think reporters are very, very tough and looking for got you kind of moments, like trying to catch you out all the time. And that's not usually the case. In my experience, most reporters are looking for that story. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the information that will make the story. So I think obviously be on your toes about what you're going to say and how you say it, but don't be overly worried that they're looking to catch you out in any way, because I don't think they are on the whole.
Totally. Having been a journalist in the past, maybe that's why my media trainings are tough, is I just remember that I would always look for the quotes and the reactions that would create the juice of the story, the meat, like the really juicy parts of the story are where the quotes come in, because the rest is informational. As a journalist, they're sharing the information, and the quotes bring the opinions and personality, and that aspect to the story is so important. So as a journalist, their job when they're asking questions of these C-suite executives, spokespeople, their expertise, they're looking for the quotes that are sharing opinions or reactionary or add more to the whole story. Because the rest, again, like I said, is it's supposed to be purely informational, and show, no opinion. I've said this before. The first rule of journalism is to seek the truth and report it. The quotes in between the lines are what bring color to what would otherwise be a very flat story.
And that's a really interesting perspective that you bring, being a former journalist. And that's why some of the best PR people were formerly reporters and transitioned into PR. Obviously not in every case, like myself, but in some of them.
And vice versa. I know a lot of PR people that went on to the journalism side. But yeah, I like bringing that perspective to what I do. And I see it especially utilized in my media training. And like you said, it's to prepare our clients for the worst case scenario, because there could be opportunities where journalists are very tough and they do ask questions that we don't necessarily want our spokespeople to answer. They don't want to answer. And like you said, it's perfectly okay to say, I appreciate the question, I can't answer at this time.
And also to be able to, say it forcefully enough that the reporter moves on and understands that for whatever reason, that's something they can't discuss right now. And I think, again, you may have a different take, but I think reporters do respect that.
Definitely. I think being stern and learning how to be stern in a conversation. But again, journalists will try every single which way they can until the question is answered. And that is why we practice, and that is why we do media training, so that we can understand how to answer the questions, like nightmare questions, in the shortest way possible, and then bridge to our key messages, and then close and move on to the next. But moving on from this kind of media training aspect, another part of our PR toolbox, and I see the importance of it very often, especially right now with the landscape in media being that there's less people in the newsrooms, is thought leadership and opinion pieces. Because a lot of journalists or editors are coming back and saying to me, hey, this is a really interesting topic. I would love to have an interview, but we just don't have the bandwidth. Would this executive be interested in submitting a thought leadership piece, contributed content article for the publication? So another kind of aspect of our PR toolkit is creating the content around that or working in collaboration with the C-suite executives to create a thought leadership piece.
Yeah, I found generally, instead of an interview, because as you say, everyone's bandwidth is a bit shorter than it would have been a couple of years ago. I find instead of interviews, thought leadership articles are a great way to go. For a PR professional like us, I think they're very exciting because we get to use our creativity. It's not a press release in terms of it's got to be dry and factual. You can put the personality of the author into the piece, and you can really think about interesting ways to explain a topic, and also just interesting topics in general. So for me, it's much more exciting than doing other parts of PR, and it's good for the author as well because it gives them more control over what's going to be said. Sometimes the editor may cut it down a little bit if it's too long, but on the whole, they get to write what they want, as long as it's vendor neutral, by the way. It should never have anything about your company. It should just be about the industry and topics within the industry.
That's a really important point, I think, that we haven't discussed previously, is that PR is not a tool to be self-promotional. PR is a way of inserting companies into news stories to bring expertise to the topics, but not necessarily discuss the technology that they are working on. That is something that sounds so weird and foreign to a lot of executives, is that what's the point of it if they're not going to be able to talk about what they do, which in some cases they are, and journalists will ask and they're curious and they want to understand. But a lot of the times when you're talking about a certain news topic, the journalist doesn't care exactly what your tech does. They want expertise in a certain field, and because your tech is specific to a certain field, you are an expert in that industry. It's not a time for you to say, oh yeah, and we do this and we have this many customers and this is the percentage that we have been able to transform, different operations, et cetera, whatever it may be. It is a time to establish thought leadership, authority, make sure that potentially your end consumer can invest and trust in you, because you're talking about something to such a high level, such a high authority, that they're like, oh, maybe I will use their technology, or maybe I will look into them further because they know so much about this topic. I hope that I explain that in a way that allows people to understand that it's such a tough distinction, because traditional marketing is, advertising and stuff like that, is really like pushing yourself out there and being promotional. And, we see brand awareness efforts when we're talking about in the traditional marketing aspect is social media. And I know that it's not so traditional because social media is something that's fairly new in the grand scheme of marketing, but social media is pushing yourself out there and being promotional. It's also a brand awareness thing because it's not necessarily bringing lead generation It could be, you could be using it now with like Meta and Instagram and everything working together, but it's important to make the distinction that PR is a tool for brand awareness to insert yourself into other media, not the company itself pushing out different social media, different ads, different all that stuff. It's adding another level of credibility to the company to explain the how and the why, insert that within different media stories. And it's not the company itself pushing out these initiatives. It's the journalists and the publications that enable their voices to be heard.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you want to promote your company really, really hard and actively, then paid advertising is definitely the way to do that. But as you say, that's not this. And, it reminds me of, you don't want to be that guy in the room who someone asks you a question about whatever it may be, but you always bring it back to yourself. It's that kind of thing. You don't want to be doing that in these thought leadership articles. You want to be talking about the topics, why they're important, potential solutions as well, which maybe in grand schemes you are dealing with, but it needs to add something to the general conversation. It can't just be about why your company is doing this and why your company is brilliant, because that's not the point of it.
It's not that paid placements in media don't exist. There are opportunities for self-promotion through sponsored posts and those types of things. But those are sponsored and those are clearly marked and those are clearly paid for. That's something that deals with a different goal.
And it's important that publications clearly mark when something is sponsored and when it's not, because transparency and honesty are crucial for building trust and credibility for a company, which is what we're striving for with PR. And that's also, by the way, why we talk about it in terms of investment and investing in the company, in terms of when someone is hopefully going to start a PR campaign. It's an investment because there's no direct ROI. And I think we'll talk about this at some point down the line in another episode in more detail. So you need to think of it in those terms. And I think once you get your head around that, it becomes a bit easier for a CEO to understand.
Definitely. I think we discussed a lot about what's included in kind of our PR toolbox. Are there any other things? I mean, there's always more things that we can pull out of our box of tricks, you could call it. But we talked about media monitoring. We've talked about content and thought leadership. We've talked about creating the strategy and putting down the foundation. We've talked about press releases. Is there anything else we haven't talked about that we might need to?
There are loads of tools that we have, social media being one of them, but I think that's too big a topic to discuss. It probably needs its own episode just to discuss everything that you can and talk about everything that goes on in social media. But hey, look, if you're listening and you think we've forgotten a really important one, please let us know.
Yeah, definitely let us know. So if you're a founder trying to get your startup noticed, a marketer looking to up your PR game, or just curious about the stories behind the headlines, we really, really hope this conversation gave you a bit more of an inside look into our PR practices. And if you're a PR person that does something differently, let us know. We always want to sharpen our skills and add more tools to our toolbox.
PR is very grey. There's no black and white. So if you do something differently, just let us know. But either way, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you have any questions or suggestions on topics we should talk about, send us your thoughts at prontheRec, that's PR on the REC, @gmail.com. Thank you all for listening. And again, I'm Ariel.
And I'm Shahni. This was PR on the record, going off the record. See you next time.